are, and the more able they are to comply with demands you place on them, and the more appropriate the consequences when they violate your expectations and rules. Because the children know to expect this, and they know to expect, in fact, the consequences as well, because we've discussed this before, it's not new. So the dangers of not being connected to your children, being disconnected, not having a warm environment are many. Again, the biggest ones we've covered. They seek out peers who have much less good judgment and clear judgment than you do, who are much less mature, who are much less experienced, and who much less are invested in your children. And so they get bad ideas, and their ideas, unfortunately, are reinforced by these peers who also may be disenfranchised. And they rely on each other, and the cycle perpetuates. And again, this puts the children at increased risk of delinquency and a lot of those bad outcomes that we talked about at the very beginning, statistically. So warmth is important, and these are some elements to keep in mind in order to achieve the warmth. And I don't fly through this stuff. A lot of this is very open to discussion, and if there's any topic that we've covered that you want to discuss later, inshallah, we can discuss it further. So then the other aspect is establishing control. And that involves providing guidance and discipline. So you want to provide guidance to your children in new situations, and you want to be able to help them with anticipated events. So a lot of what happens in life, you can anticipate. You've been there, you've been through that. Your children haven't. You're going through it for the first time. So our jobs as parents is not only to respond to here and now, but to anticipate. And then to endow our children with the skills to meet the challenges of life. So when your toddler is running around, learning how the infant is learning to walk, crawl, you're there to guide them and help them. When they're transitioning to school, you're there to help them with the transition to school. When they're transitioning from what we call the latency period, the school age to the adolescent or teenage period, you're there to help them with that transition, where tremendous changes are happening to their bodies, to their minds, they're developing. So all of those things, as parents, we need to anticipate, we need to guide and develop skills in our children to respond to those demands that they may face. So for example, a 10-year-old is likely more secure from being approached by someone selling marijuana. Unfortunately, in this country, a 13, 14, 15-year-old is much more likely to be approached and have that scenario play out. And if you haven't guided your child on how to respond, you're not going to know. So it's very important to anticipate and to provide guidance. As I've said, monitoring is critical. Supervision is critical. Studies bear this out. Children who lack monitoring and supervision don't do well. You can be that parent who is always volunteering. Volunteer to have your kids and their friends gather at your home. Be the one to volunteer to supervise. If your child's school is going on a field trip and they need chaperones, you be the one to volunteer to be the chaperone. I make sure my wife does that volunteering, so I'm not sure. But someone needs to be doing that in the household. Obviously, we want to be involved. We want to volunteer. We want to monitor and supervise our children. As I said earlier, spell out expectations so that the kids know what's coming. Life is controlled, not chaos, and they know what's expected of them. They know what the consequences are based on those expectations. It's important to keep one thing in mind. Our studies are very clear that positive reinforcement works better than punishment. It doesn't mean that you don't punish. Absolutely, you have to set consequences, you have to discipline children. But you're much better rewarding them for doing the right thing ahead of time. So guiding them and watching them go in the right direction, even if they're straying a little bit, catch the good. We in the field we like to say catch them being good. Catch them and reinforce that. The more you reinforce positive behavior, the more attention, love, affection, praise you give for the positive, the less likely children are to go the negative route. So do that before you resort to punishment. And of course, punishment is necessary when violations of rules occur and when a child needs disciplining. In terms of the discipline that you choose, you have to be firm. There's no doubt about that. But you need to be able to be flexible. And by that I mean you need to be responsive to what happens. So let's say your child is playing ball near your neighbor's window. You've told them time and time again, don't play ball there, they disregarded that, and oops, the ball went through the window, glass is shattered. What do you do now? The neighbor's irate, they come to you, they're angry, they're upset. How do you react? So spanking the child is probably not the best response to that scenario. Taking them aside, discussing natural consequences, apologizing to the neighbor, having the child clean up the mess, helping to clean up the mess, and then figuring out how the child is going to earn the money to pay for a new window for the neighbor. Those might be very appropriate and natural consequences of that. If this is the first time the child has ever done something like this, then you may not be, it might not be such a harsh punishment. If this is a repeat offense, then you might definitely need to adhere to all of what I've just mentioned, and perhaps more. Maybe they'll need to be grounded for a week. Again, the punishment should fit the crime, and it should also fit the child's developmental age. So the ruckus that little kids may engage in, sometimes a simple ignoring of behavior that's not disruptive or dangerous may be enough. And then again, positive reinforcement regarding the things they're doing that's right, and giving that a lot of attention, may be all it takes to switch a negative behavior to a more positive one. Of course, an older child who's deliberately engaging in negative, inappropriate behavior, the response from you should be quite different. And that's when things like grounding or other forms of punishment may be much more appropriate. You also have to be careful, again, about the harshness of your punishment, no matter what it is. A month of grounding may actually lose its effectiveness when a week of restraining them from certain activities that they love, spending time on sports or friends or whatever it is, may be as effective and sometimes more. Because just think about it, after a month, who remembers what it was a month ago that got them in trouble? What they have is 30 days of seething anger towards you about why they're about being grounded, right? So again, you want to be really thoughtful about are you going too far? You don't want to be minimal in the punishment. It really should be something that's significant. Otherwise, it will lack impact. But you don't want to go overboard. And the literature is also very clear that corporal punishment doesn't work. Spanking is done by a lot of individuals. I think what it does ultimately is it's a way for parents to release their own frustration. And I can say, I have 3 children. My youngest is 3.5, and I've hit him once, and I hope Michelle will never hit him again. And the time that I hit him, I know it wasn't about me really influencing his behavior. I know for a fact in my heart that I was releasing my own frustration at whatever behavior he was doing in that moment that I thought was so terrible. So really, I don't think in most cases, and I think the research is clear on this too, that kind of punishment results in something effective, in the child learning something. All they learn is violence to resolve problems, and that's something that we don't want to teach our children. We want to keep them away from aggression. So that's something to also be very clear about. Not only do you want to focus when you're disciplining on consequences, and maybe not in the moment. One of the problems that parents encounter when disciplining their children, and I think mothers may be more inclined to do this than fathers, is to overtalk to their children when providing discipline. So at the moment you're disciplining your child, you really don't need to engage them in a very lengthy discussion, because everyone is heated. The child, you, no one's really happy, and no one's really listening so carefully to what the other has to say, or taking that into account. So you want to give it a little bit of time. It may be half an hour to an hour later, and depending on the environment, maybe the next day. Use your best judgment. But as you're putting your 7-year-old in timeout, may not be the best time to give a very long explanation for why they ended up in timeout. That may be better to do after the timeout is over. And remember, we want our children to think about alternative ways of dealing with the world. So that use punishment and discipline as an opportunity to teach them something. And like I said, corporal punishment doesn't accomplish that. So you really want to be able to, at some point, talk to them about what they did, why